Hello, welcome to the Faculty of Community Services support videos. So right now we're going to talk about quoting and paraphrasing. So these are the two main ways that you are going to incorporate source material into your academic papers. That means when your teacher tells you, this essay requires 5 peer-reviewed citations, quoting and paraphrasing will be how you use those citations. The first thing that you want to think about is, why do we cite sources to begin with? Number 1, to prove that our point is correct. Remember that when you use your research efficiently, it shows that you know how to research efficiently. And this is something that professors love to see because it means that you're engaging with critical thinking in the course material. Number 2, to illustrate our points with an example. Maybe somebody in an academic peer-reviewed article happens to use the exact right jargon, the exact right tone, and you just don't think you can say it any better. It's okay to use that, just cite it properly. Or number 3, to show how we've arrived at an original conclusion. Maybe you're using somebody else's point to refute that point. Your whole argument is based on incorporating sources in order to disprove them. That's okay too. Some common citation mistakes. Number 1, summarize the secondary source's views. Just because you can understand what a source is saying doesn't mean that you are engaging critically in it, so you want to try and avoid summarizing. Number 2, you don't want to prove a point that belongs to the source and not you. This goes along with summarizing. The point of research papers is not to say that you agree and understand somebody else's point of view or thesis. It is instead to have your own. And number 3, you should never use sources to mislead the reader. Don't take a quote out of context, and don't try and make quotes fit into your paper where they don't fit. So now let's take a look at the 2 ways that you can use source material in your own writing, namely quoting and paraphrasing. The difference being whether you are using exactly your source's words or using your own words. Quotations must be identical to the original source material, and they must also be attributed to their original author. You want to use a narrow segment of the source. Keep your quotes short. Use quotation marks to differentiate the author's voice from yours. And your quotes, remember, must always be justified. Don't use a quote without explaining why you did so. After the quote, that's your opportunity to show how exactly you feel it supports your point or idea. You want to explain to the reader why you chose that particular quote and why it's relevant. You don't want to have a quote making a point for you. Paraphrasing involves taking the words of your sources and putting it into your own words. That means reorganizing them, coming up with new ones, changing the sentence structure, combining paraphrased ideas from multiple sources, any sort of way that you can play around with the words to attain the same meaning with different syntax. A paraphrase must also be attributed to the original source, and APA style guides advise you to use a page number, that means in-text citation, even when you're paraphrasing a source. Here again is another opportunity to show the marker or the reader that you are actually engaged with the material. You can think about it and rephrase it. You can think about it in terms of how it applies to your paper and how it integrates with other sources. Paraphrased material is usually shorter than the original passage. It takes a broad segment and condenses it. This is a good way to contrast different sources' ideas using your own paraphrasing and citations. So how do you know when to quote and when to paraphrase? Some good opportunities to quote source material when the wording is perfectly suited to your argument, when the wording or the intention of the source is something you're trying to disprove, or when the idea you're trying to express from the source is condensed conveniently into 1 or 2 sentences where you feel that you may not necessarily have been able to say it so concisely. And remember that quotes may not run any longer than 3 lines of your essay, that's 40 words, unless you use block quotation format. But you should only be using this in extraordinary circumstances. Otherwise, you want to paraphrase. Paraphrase the source material when you feel that a brief summary of the source's idea would be supportive to your point, when you're defining a term that you use in your paper and the source also uses, or when you're referencing historical events that the source has really managed to compact. Again, this is very helpful when you're contrasting the ideas of multiple sources. Remember, use your sources appropriately and don't let them use you. Short quotations, mostly what you'll be relying on in your essays, consist of 40 words or less. When you're using a direct quote, include the author, the publication date, and the page number. Here's an example. According to Smith, 2009, the FCS Drop-In Support Center is very reputable for their services. End quote, page 20. Here are some other ways that you can integrate quotes into your research papers. Introduce the quotation with the year and the author's name. Put the page number in parentheses after the quotation. So here's an example. In 1969, Rogers stated that the potentiality and desire for learning, for discovery, for enlargement of knowledge and experience can be released under suitable conditions. End quote, page 158. You can introduce the quotation with the author's name followed by the year in parentheses. Put the page number in parentheses after the quotation. Rogers, 1969, stated that the potentiality and desire for learning, for discovery, for enlargement of knowledge and experience can be released under suitable conditions. Page 158. Put the author's name, the year, and the page quotation in parentheses after the quotation. So if you go to the end of that quote, then you see all in brackets, Rogers, 1969, page 158. If you repeat the same source in the same paragraph, you do not need to include the year in the second citation. Rogers, 1969, stated that people's learning potential can be released under suitable conditions. Page 158. Rogers further argues that his approach to education provided the conditions necessary for students to fulfill their natural desire to learn. Also, page 158. A word on long quotations. As I said, they contain 40 words or more, and you must double space a block format. So you introduce the quotation similarly to what we just discussed, and then indent 5 spaces from the left. Don't use quotation marks, and put a period at the end of the quotation, followed by the page number in parentheses. So to conclude, when you're working on an essay or a research paper, you want to ensure that the writing is all your own. Your professors want to see that you're engaging with material, not adopting your source's ideas. Proper incorporation of sources is absolutely mandatory for good writing assignments. Good luck and get writing!